Hi there, entire internet. This is Doug, the Eclipse dude, with another fine installment on training on our very favorite piece of software, Epicor Eclipse. That's right, all the cool kids are talking about it these days. Today's video is going to cover user account creation in Epicor Eclipse, and this can be an extremely complicated subject or an extremely easy subject, depending on how you want to look at it. I'm going to give you both because I'm that kind of guy. So let us get started here. I should say before going forward, excuse me if I'm a little punchy, this is now the fourth time I've tried to re-record this thing, and I think I need some more coffee. Anyway, let us start close to the beginning here. So, back in the day when Eclipse was first created, this was the user interface into the system. This is an application called Eterm. It is, for those old codgers that still remember mini computers and mainframes, it is a modified telnet terminal. A terminal emulator that talks to a mainframe-based application, which is what the underlying system that underpins Eclipse, the universe database, is basically built under. Eclipse is, by modern standards, a very unusual piece of software in that it has multiple user interfaces. This can get a little confusing, and it also influences how exactly you create a user, because if there's only a particular interface the user wants to use, there's a slightly different combination of settings that you need to do. The worst possible scenario is when you have a user that needs to use all of the different interfaces. Then you get in the woods. For those of us that don't know it, Eclipse was an evolution from an earlier product owned by Infor called Shims. And Shims also was a mini computer mainframe based application. It used a terminal emulator that was a third-party program. I think it was called Eterm. When Eclipse came about, they decided they didn't want to pay licenses to Eterm anymore because that was a small fortune and kind of ridiculous, and so they created Eterm specifically for their uses. As I said, it uses the Telnet protocol. It does the same kind of things Telnet does. It's extremely unsecure connection. This is part of the reason why you never have and never will have a Eclipse server on the internet with direct access, because the way the application is built on its very underpinnings, it's extremely unsecure and damn near impossible to secure. So in any cases, if you need to access an Eclipse system across an internet connection, the only way of having any type of security is using a VPN. So this is the original interface, and there is a whole way of setting up users according to what's required in this interface. Solar is, of course, where most of us live nowadays. This was written by Intuit when they had bought Eclipse back in the late 90s, early 2000s, I guess it was. And this was an attempt to duplicate all the functionality of Eterm into a modern graphical user interface. But unfortunately, they didn't rewrite the plumbing, the infrastructure that's the actual Eclipse application or the universe database underpinnings. They couldn't. So this is kind of like putting lipstick on a pig. It took them years to try and get the functionality that was in Eterm into Solar. Solar is not really a modern graphical user interface because it's a Java application, so it's a little awkward in the way it kind of operates and does things. It's kind of a kludge, if you ask me. A very well-designed kludge, but still a kludge. And because of all the plumbing that is Eclipse and the universe database, there are some functions they will never be able to write into Solar. I think Solar kind of came out, I think, around 2003, 2004. And in In now 20 years, it's probably only 90% of the functionality of Eterm. A lot of low-level administrator functions or common things or access to old-style reports, you still have to go to Eterm to do. You will never, ever get away from someone in the company is going to have access to Eterm to administer the system. That's just the way it's going to be forever. Until they completely rewrite all the plumbing that's the application, and let's face it, Epicore's not going to do that. So the Solar interface is where all of the enhancements that are added in Eclipse. So even though Eterm still works, and for most common functions, you can still do everything in Eterm. A lot of the additional things or access to additional fields of data will only show up in the Solar interface. So, for most of your users, even though I prefer Eterm because it's faster and a little easier to read for old eyes, you really should be setting up all your new users on Solar. There are additional parameters and settings that affect just the Solar interface, and this is why we bring that up. So that's the two main interfaces, and now there are actually a couple more that have evolved over the time, and there might even be more than the couple that I'm going to talk about. One of the number 3 would be the Eclipse Mobile, which is a companion product, which was designed for the outside sales force to be able to do quotes and check stock and look up product information, and for executives to do a business summary of how good the branch was doing that day or that type of stuff. This was a really neat product when they came up with it. Unfortunately, they've never added anything to it, and I think they'd probably have to completely rewrite it because of the way this thing was structured. But it was a pretty cool thing back in the day. So since you can do sales order entry from here, I would call this a third interface. And then the more recent one is the Eclipse API, of which people know very little about it. It's a little quirky. Epicore hasn't exactly decided yet how they're going to sell this thing. The basic Eclipse API functions are free, but you have to call up tech support to have them installed in your system and turned on. So many of you probably don't even know it exists. And the enhanced functions, I think there's 3 levels, and you have to pay an astronomical sum of money depending on what level of enhanced API functionality you want. API, this is a programmatic interface, being able to do a language like Python and interact with the Eclipse application programmatically. The free level API basically gives you just one-way read information out of Eclipse, and usually pretty basic stuff like customer information like phone numbers, addresses, names, account information, account balances maybe. The basic level, you really can't write anything into Eclipse programmatically, which is exactly the thing you'd want to do, of course. That's not an accident. The other levels, they don't have the API completely finished yet. It's a little quirky and has some security issues there, I would say. They keep writing new functions to be able to write things into Eclipse programmatically, but right now it's really limited as last that I know of. So something like having a web interface that could generate a order into Eclipse via a Python program, I don't think that functionality is there yet. They intend to, of course, to try and modernize the application as much as possible. So that would be interface number 4, and there's probably 2 others that I don't know of that are in there as well. Each one of these interfaces has a different kind of security, different set of parameters in the user account that have to be considered. So I'm sorry that I had to go through that bit, but a lot of the other stuff that you'll see going forward won't make any sense unless you understand those bits. Now, a final bit on security. As I said, Eclipse at its foundation is a very ancient program. It predates the public release of the internet. So security was not even considered, all that seriously. It was more user identification than actually securing things off and designed around a local network. So, as I said, the original interface, here, telnet session, plain text information sent across the network connection. And they quit writing any modifications to Eterm well over a decade ago, so that will never be secured. You never, even if you could, ever want to put an Eclipse server on the internet, because there's no way to lock it down. It'll get hacked immediately, if anyone has an interest to. And Solar, it also, as far as I know, plain text communication, no encryption, and so that could never be put across the internet. You have to use a VPN connection to encrypt it. On the Eclipse Mobile, that's a web-based application. It does have a signed SSL certificate, and it runs on a secondary server. That's a Windows 11 server running IIS web services, and so it uses the same primitive passwords that Eclipse does to log into it, but it's limited functionality. There's not a lot of damage a hacker could do here. I mean, they could generate a sales order for you, whoopee. But at least there's enough security that once you've typed in your password, it's running an HTTPS connection, so at least it's not sending plain text across the internet. So this is the only interface that doesn't need a VPN connection and can operate on cell phones, tablets, etc. So going back to the basics, the original security structure that was built around the Eclipse application, and considering 1988, they actually put a very serious bit of thought into how they constructed how people were going to interact with parts of the system as a multi-user system. Pretty robust, even today, although kind of convoluted by today's standards. So, in the original application, I'm sure a lot of this was carried over with the structure of how the universe database works, and how it was designed. But in the Eclipse application, they built a security paradigm on several levels. First is menus. The system is designed that when it's put in, the installer comes in and constructs custom menus according to the dictates of the company that's having Eclipse put in, and they decide what level of employee needs to see what. So here you see the full menu in the original Eterm, including F8 for other, and you get to see the other things. This is the full menu. And quite often, if you were just a normal salesman or a normal warehouse worker, they would use the menu program editor built into the system to remove most of these. And all you'd see is orders and maybe purchasing and other, or something like that. Within the menus, the sub-functions, they would also edit out the functions under files. So perhaps as a salesman, they want you to go in and create product records and change those around, but they didn't want you to change sales tax or zip codes or any of that stuff, so they take that off of the menu. And so that was their first level of security thinking, which is, hey, if you can't see it and you can't select it, then you can't get into it and mess around. So if you don't know it exists and there's no clear way of getting to it, then you can't cause problems. So yeah, okay, that's a simple thought. The next thing is authorization keys, and this is where it really gets horribly convoluted. And authorization keys are within a menu selection, and keep in mind in Eclipse, every menu selection is a pick basic program that runs. The authorization keys are allow you access to run certain programs that are the functions of Eclipse, or not. And a combination of authorization keys gives you access to a set of things that you can do in the system. And then within authorizations, you have levels. So, okay, you can run the program, but what things are you allowed to see or do within that program? Most of them, you see authorization levels of 1, 2, or 1, 2, and 3, which are usually like, I can view it, but I can't change it. I can view it and change it, but I can't create new ones. Or a level 3 might be, I can view it, I can change it, and I can create new ones. That type of stuff. So menus, authorization keys, levels. Those are the primary security mechanisms within the application. The final bits that have effect on who can do what and where is terminal IDs. And when you log into the system, whether it be Solar or Eterm, you see here the terminal ID, which is set in Eterm. It's set in the communication settings right here under ID, or in Solar. Let me bring that up. You'll see the terminal ID here, and that's set here under the gear, under Solar preferences, and there we see it there. All right. So when you set up a user, these are considered locations, and if a user doesn't have a certain location, then a PC that he or she goes to log into, if it's set with one of these terminal IDs that they're not authorized to use, they can't use that PC. So that restricts that. The intent of that was mainly in the case of like an accounts payable area where they might have a printer that is just set up for printing checks, and they've always got check stock in it, and they want to make sure that some warehouse guy didn't walk in, write himself a blank check for $1 million and walk out the door, that type of thing. So if the warehouse worker has an account where they don't even have the terminal ID, the location to log into that AP terminal and print that check, then problem solved. So that's what the terminal ID/locations do. So when you set up a user, make sure you set them up for the locations that they need to operate in, or else you've screwed yourself. And the last bit that I can think of, well, you have territories. If you had a big company that maybe has operate all across the United States, if a user is not assigned a particular territory that a branch falls under, they might not be able to do certain things. That's kind of rare. But it is not unusual that a user might be confined to only operate within a certain branch. This to me is a bad idea. I mean, if you had a company with 5 or 10 branches, which would be not unusual, and you're a little short-staffed in one branch, it wouldn't be unusual to send one of your guys over there to cover for a week or two. So if they're not assigned access to that branch, then you've sent them there and they can't even log in and do their jobs because they're not authorized to log into any of the terminal locations, terminal IDs within that branch. All right, so the rundown again. So menus, okay, we got that. Authorization keys, we got that. Levels within authorization keys, we've got that. Terminal ID, terminal locations, we've got that. Territories, which you will never see more than likely, and branches, which you will see. All of those things make up security. This is why security and user account creation can be so unholy complex in Solar, because all of these things have to be kept in mind if you're trying to do something from scratch. But there's the simple way, and then there's the hard way. So I'm going to do the next bits here in Solar just because that's the interface that most of you all either are operating in or will be operating in the future. Probably all of your new accounts should be Solar accounts because you're dealing with newer guys, and The terminal interface is usually mostly just for us old codgers or old small companies. All right. So the simplest way of creating a new account with just simple access to Solar would be to go into user maintenance and copy an existing user. Okay, user control. And so, for example, somebody hired a new warehouse worker today. They didn't warn me because that's how management rolls. Probably spent a month, interviewing this guy and such, and they bring him in, 5:30 in the morning, he shows up. He's been sitting here for half an hour waiting for me to show up to create an account because no one bothered to tell me this guy was showing up. That's the way the world works. Yeah, I'm psychic. I read your mind, right? All right, so, okay, I'm in a hurry. I don't have time to think about all this other stuff, and I got this guy going, hey, I've been sitting here for half an hour, I'm going to get fired unless I have my job. Okay, so, warehouse worker. I'm familiar enough with the employees. I know, okay, this guy sounds like the job that he's going to be doing is very similar to this other guy that we have on staff named Jacob Torres. All right, so the simplest thing for me to do is Jacob is already set up. So I don't have to think about all of the authorization keys and all the levels and all that good stuff. I know Jacob can do his job, so how this is set has got pretty much everything I need, so I can just copy it with a few tweaks. So I bring up the account, and then I do a new, and the system will ask me if I want to use the current record that I have up as a prototype, and I tell it yes, and that's how we make a copy. And so I'm going to create a generic account for warehouse 1 for this basic warehouse worker, and we're going to do OK. We can see here the users changed here to warehouse 1, so I'm not making changes to Jacob Torres. And now there's just a few checks and tweaks that I have to do this, and we're good to go. So we're going to change the name here. All right. We're going to change that to... Most of this is just simply informational. Change the sort by, so when I search it, it shows up right. In the case of this company, some of our warehouse workers sometimes fill in on the counter, so he will also be a salesman. We do have a commission plan set up here, so I want him to show up on the commission reports if he does do sales, so we can give him a little commission check, because that's how we roll here in my company. All right, and now the next thing, remember I mentioned locations. So this guy... we have a small company. He needs to operate in all branches and all locations. So in our system, which may be different than your system, all of the locations and all of the branches in the company are assigned to all of our employees, because we have people running many hats, and I have no idea from moment to moment where they're going to be, and I want to make sure they can do their job. Being able to do their job for us is more important than high security. So far, I've not yet in 20 years ever had a salesman log into an unauthorized terminal, or a terminal he shouldn't have been authorized to, and do something weird in the system he wasn't supposed to do. So it hasn't been a big deal. All right, so all the terminal locations, that means any PC in the system he should be able to use to log into Eclipse, or she. All right, good. Yes, we'll save those changes. With those terminal locations, I have to have them assigned to all the proper branches. So here are all the branches in our company, so I want to make sure, yep, he can log into, he's authorized for all of those branches and all of those locations. His home branch is branch 1, so by default, most of the reporting and booking and such is going to be towards branch 1, but this is mostly determined by the terminal ID that he logs into when he logs in. Okay, so there's just a couple other things that that we have to tweak with Solar. One is the additional user data. Here we have to change the email address that if they email a form or a document or a report out of the system, we want it to pre-populate with the right address, the email address. In Eclipse, almost everything that you email out of the system is going to pre-populate the address, but you can overwrite them. But obviously, I want it right the first time to not induce errors. So we go ahead and change the email address for reporting. Then for my own edification, we do a quick look at the assigned menus. In our system, once again, people running several hats, so we don't truncate the menus. So these are the menus assigned for them to see all of the selections in the system. And I might do a quick look at the authorization keys. We will review this a little bit later. Just to make sure that there hasn't been something particular that Jacob does that we may have assigned him some additional keys that don't make any sense. So now in this case, these are templates, which we will explain later on. These are groupings of authorization keys and a few additional things. So this allows you simple warehouse functions, location maintenance, receiving, that type of stuff. This allows you simple counter sales with not a lot of tweaks and creativity for adjusting pricing. And then, yeah, some additional tweaks for product maintenance and location maintenance. So all that looks good. As we said, this is the simplest level, and we don't get into details and such. All right, so at this point, we can do a save. Put in our log, this is a new user. Yes, I'm being highly detailed there. And then it's going to ask for a password before it finishes this off. Okay. Now, a bit about passwords. As we said, primitive application has underpinnings. Almost none of the applications do data encryption back and forth to the Eclipse server. So these passwords do not need to be and should not be robust like the type of passwords you have into your phone or your bank account, that type of stuff, because this will never be on the internet. These passwords should be as simple as possible because they need to be memorable. Quite often you're going to have common accounts. There's several people might be using one account. Yes, this happens. And also it's normal, considering the legacy systems that are Eclipse out there. There aren't a whole lot of new Eclipse users out there, and almost all legacy people, we use caps lock and everything's in all caps in Eclipse for a little bit reader because we got older eyes and some of these screens get a little blurry when you stare at them for a while. Because the caps lock key may or may not be on most of the time, having a upper lowercase alphanumeric password that's like 8 characters long or such, a standard internet level security, will screw people up. So don't do it. In Eclipse, standard passwords are usually just 4 characters and they're usually just numbers. So that bypasses any issues you might have if the caps lock key is on or off. A good standard is to use the last 4 of someone's social security as their password. That pretty much ensures uniqueness and is pretty easy for people to remember. In this case, this is going to be a generic account that several people are going to use, so I'm going to use the street address of that branch. All right. And okay. All right, and with that, we can go ahead and exit. And yeah, all right. One more level of log information. And now I'm going to look at that one more time and make sure that it came out like I expected, and I didn't do anything really stupid, because I hate it when I do stupid stuff. And that all looks pretty good. Okay. Now, of course, we don't want to trust this as God's gospel, so we're going to go ahead and log out and log back in from scratch and make sure that this account works. All right. And Solar's being its spooky self today. Come on, Solar. All right, so I believe Eclipse Solar is case insensitive. Let me check that. At least in the login. Eterm, on the other hand, is extremely case sensitive, so God help you. Yeah, all right, that looks good. All right, and we've got what we want. Now, keep in mind, if you create a Solar user, there is no real way of having a pre-populated set of widgets that are assigned to a user account or template. So even though you've created the user, if there's a standard set of widget functions that you need, you're going to have to log in as them and create the widgets manually, and that gets to be a pain in the ass. But luckily, widgets are... they can be useful, but don't get too crazy with them, because the more widgets you have, the more it bogs down the system, because some of them have to be refreshed with data. It can also make the Solar interface a little slower or throw errors at times. So, put in the widgets that are useful. Don't get crazy with them and put 50 or 60 of the damn things in. Usually 3 or 4 or 5 for any particular employee function is just fine. All right, so that bit is done. But now we're going to show you the gotcha. So that was just a setup for Solar. And if they're just a Solar user, done and done, and everything's lovely and you love life. Well, in our particular company, we have warehouse workers that are using PCs and doing location maintenance and adjustments in the warehouse during the course of the day. And because Solar doesn't work very, very well on our old clunky notebooks, we use Eterm. So it turns out this warehouse worker also needs to use Eterm. And if you just do that type of setup, first off, this is case sensitive, so if you do WHS1 like that, it ain't gonna work. But let's see here, 1522, and guess what we got? Wah wah, ain't gonna work, because Eterm, that type of setup will only work for Solar, and the more modern the user interfaces, it will not work on Eterm. There's a whole nother level of stuff that you have to do in Eterm. But anyway, we showed you the basics of how to set up the Solar. Now we'll explain the quirks of setting up access to Eterm. So this is why it's important to give some clear thought about what a user needs to do and in what interface before you start creating them, or else you will cause yourself a problem like this. Okay, guy can do Solar just great, can't do Eterm. Now we'd have to fix that up. All right, so if you have a user that needs to be in Eterm and Solar, then the way you would do this process would be substantially different. I can fix up this this account, and for the purposes of this training video, though, rather than confusing with you how to go about and add the authorizations for Eterm for the account that we already made, I'm going to create a whole new one, keeping Eterm in mind from the start, and you'll get the gist of it. So, when you're in IT, as long as I've been, you develop the habit of taking nothing for granted. Assume that users are going to do things that you would have never thought of doing. Assume that management, not knowing your job and knowing how easy or difficult something is routinely going to ask for the impossible for free and done yesterday. Because they don't know. They have no framework. Never start something and assume that that a particular user only needs one set of things, go into exquisite detail of what your job is again, what are you going to do, and assume that they've left out some things, and be more generous on what they need access to than less so. Or else you will, like in the first 5 years that I had Eclipse, where we had a pretty robust security system, and I spent the next 3 to 5 years on a daily basis, 5 or 10 times a day, slowly unwinding and adding authorizations and adding levels and and rewriting menus to add more and more functions, because they'd taken so much away that people couldn't do their jobs like they needed to do. So yeah, in the world of the internet, you think from a most restrictive as possible paradigm. If you do that in Eclipse, you will hang yourself. If you don't want your full-time job to be adding another authorization key and testing menu functions, don't go there. All right, so a hybrid user that needs to be able to access Eterm and Solar should be done through the Eterm interface. So let's start this again. Now let me explain this before I go any further. You'll notice, as I mentioned, Eterm, modified telnet session. What are we looking at here? What we're looking at is a Linux login. Your primary Eclipse server is a Unix based, your Unix derivative server. And what you're logging into is Linux. Then as soon as you've logged in, what it's going to do is going to look at the profile. It's going to redirect you and put you in the Rocket Universe kernel, which is the database, and run the Eclipse application from there, where you get all the blue screens and Eclipse, that type of thing. So this is the original old style of doing things. This is kind of mainframe error type of thinking. Universe, I'm going to give you information you probably don't want to know, but Universe was originally conceived as an operating system all its own. It was designed where you erase the entire native operating system of the mainframe. You put in the Universe operating system, which was just designed basically to just run the primitive functions of maintaining the mainframe or mini computer, and create the database that you would write pick basic applications for database functions. So it was designed around that. Over the years, they've done the barest minimum to, put lipstick on the pig and keep reselling decades-old code over and over and over again. So in the current incarnation, what you have is the Rocket Universe database, the PIC system. It is kind of a symbiotic relationship. It sits in Linux. And so in Eterm, you log into Linux. Linux redirects you to the symbiotic Universe database and then runs from there. And so that's why the account security is a little weird, because it's very old style of thinking. If you care to know anything more about Universe, I would redirect you to Rocket. Rocket is the current owner and developer of the Universe system. Universe, the database, has a lot of neat stuff built into it. If you have access to the Linux server and you want to be creative, I mean, you could write pick basic programs or whichever you want. They've got some good technical documentation. It may give you a better idea of things underneath Eclipse that could be useful, mostly for reporting. But anyway, it's in there. Anyway, so blah, 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 blah. That was a lot of probably confusing shit, and I'm sorry. So how do we create a hybrid user? So we're going to, once again, Linux is highly case sensitive, so we can't do all caps. This confuses the shit out of old folk all the time, because once again, usually have the caps lock on. You have to take it out of caps lock before you log in. All right. Now, that was real fast and hard to see, but that was exactly what I was talking about. Is we first get a prompt from the Linux operating system. We log in with a Linux user account. It runs the profile, which redirects it to the Universe application that's running in there. And now from here on, we're talking to Universe or Eclipse. And so this is a whole different account that's managed by Eclipse and Universe. And I'm not sure if you're catching it, but let's see here. All right. So how we create a user that's hybrid. There are several different ways of doing this. If you want some of the more formal details, download the Eclipse Red Book from the Eclipse resources. Most of what I'm getting from here is so if you want to download the original Eclipse Red Book, which was the administrator's guide as they called it, or any more detailed documentation, take a look at Epic Web and log into your account there, and there you have access to the user guides, reference guides. If you need to get a copy of Eterm to install, this is also where you would go to find the Eclipse downloads. Excuse me. Here for the document indexer and Eterm and the other stuff. Solar is installed in a different route, which we will show in a moment. Okay, so creating a hybrid user. I keep digressing. Multiple ways of doing it. Simplest way is, or at least my idea of what the simplest way is, as follows. So from Eterm, you will go into System, System Files, User Control, and they've built in a function here to add a Unix Linux user. All right, that is probably the simplest thing to do, unless of course you're a Linux guru and you want to go ahead and create a user account in a very cockeyed way manually, which I do, but I wouldn't suggest you do. All right, so we add a Linux user. This is going to create the basic Linux account, the first login, and it's also going to create a user account in the Eclipse application, and then we can do some tweaks from that. So as I said, we're going to go ahead and do the lower one, and keep in mind case sensitivity. So we want, we're going to do warehouse 2. Whoops. All right. That's going to duplicate the account. And, all right. And this is going to copy. If you had been more thoughtful, you would create generic users to use as templates rather than copying existing employees, just in case something gets tweaked. This system hasn't, and same, not much difference anyway. So we're going to copy Jacob Torres again. All right, so we've got all our information in that we need, and so we go ahead and do a Alt-C to create the user. All right, and very good. And we'll go ahead and go to user maintenance and make sure, did this person actually get created? And there we are. Now, as you can see, since it just did the basic template copy type of thing, there's still the same tweaks that we did before. I'll show you this again in this interface. But yeah, so department, warehouse, root menu, sort by WHS 2. All right, good. We want to verify, yep, assigned all the branches. Let's take a look at the authorization keys. Yep, they've got the authorization keys and the proper levels. Very good. Now in here we have to go to the additional and check the email address. Okay, so this gets to change to whs2@isw.com. All right, that's good. The solar menu is in the Eterm interface is under here, Alt-L. Make sure that yes, they're on the main menu. Basic toolbar template. All right, that is good. Password still hasn't been assigned to this thing yet. And of course, it didn't ask me for one. Okay. All right, so we have to go ahead and assign the password. For this one, we're going to use the street address of this location. So it's 20. Okay. Oops. All right, so that completes the Eterm side of things. Now, if we were in a perfect world, we should be able to log in as that. Guess what's not going to work? That's right, you're going to get wah wah. And that's because there's one more step, the most important one, or even that won't work. And this is an irritation, but this is something you only have to do with an Eterm user. All right, so what you've got to do is you've got to neutralize the, as you saw here, and I explained, it created the account in the Eclipse application, and it created the account in the Linux operating system. And this is the Linux login that you were seeing here, but it won't accept the password. That's because a password hasn't been assigned on this account. And the way that the Eterm is usually set up is it bypasses the Unix login. By default, as soon as you type in the user ID, the password into Linux is nothing. And the bash script is run, and then Universe picks up, and then the password that you're asked is for the Eclipse application. This is why you never, never, never put a Eclipse Linux server on the live internet, because all the Linux user account passwords are nothing. And this is the last step that needs to be done in order for this Eterm login to work, is we've got to log into the Linux server, and we've got to assign the password to that account as nothing. This is how this is done. First, download a program called PuTTY. It is a free terminal emulator. You cannot really operate in Linux with Eterm because the backspace and delete keys and the arrow keys translate wrong in Eterm. So use PuTTY, which is a more traditional Telnet terminal emulator program to talk to the Linux operating system. All right, in this case, I've already got the IP address for the Linux server in, and I have to log in with my root admin account. This is another thing you never, never, never do in a modern Linux system that's on the internet, is you never have root access accessible through a telnet session, which is unencrypted, and you'd never have root access indirectly anyway. You usually do sudo anyway. So we go ahead and type in our root password, or tell it we're logging in as root, and then type in the root password. Hopefully I've got the right one. Okay, and now we've got the login to the actual Eclipse Linux server, and here we are in our root directory. And in case you're kind of curious, I mean, we could see here. Here are the Linux file system, and here we can see the Eclipse application in its root directory. Anyway, so there is a command here that we have to type in to essentially assign a password of nothing to the account that we just created. Now, of course, if you're not a Linux wonk, this won't make any sense whatsoever. And if you want further clarification, this is in the Eclipse Red Book Administration Manual. And so there's two commands that you have to type in. First is to assign a password of nothing to the account. And this is going to look like usermod change password to nothing for the account WHS2. All right. And in wonderful Linux terms, when you do something right, it tells you nothing. So this will confuse you. So if you get nothing back in response, it took the command properly. All right. Then now we've assigned the password of blank to the Warehouse 2 account. Now we have to tell the Linux operating system that for this account, as soon as it logs in successfully, run the bash profile that starts the Eclipse application. All right, so we're redirecting the custom profile that the Linux operating system's assigned to the account to the bash script that was written by Eclipse. This one gets a little ugly. I guarantee you are going to type it wrong a couple of times the first time you do it. So this is ln-sf-u2 eclipse dot profile. All of this is extremely case sensitive. Home, the username, and the destination profile. Recheck this 3 times because I guarantee you're going to type it in wrong. So, as my understanding goes, what this command is going to do is it's going to take this created profile that Eclipse has written, that's stored in the universe Eclipse directory on the Linux file system. It's going to make a copy of that. It's going to overwrite bash profile for this user account. So as soon as you get a successful Linux login, it runs this script, which will start Eclipse in Eterm. All right. So if we type this all incorrectly, and whatever you do, don't ever reverse this, or else you'll try and overwrite the Eclipse profile and then you're screwed. But let's go ahead and, all right, and yeah, there's always something. And on a quick look, I can see that instead of putting in lnsf, I put lnsh, so that was a problem. In Linux, if you do an up arrow, it'll just recopy the previous command. I can go ahead and edit that. And we can do this. I've been doing this for 17 years or more, and I still get it wrong the first time. All right, so we got no error. That means it seems to work. All right. When this is done, you type exit to close the session with Linux and PuTTY, and it goes away. Now we can go ahead and test this out and make sure that we got the account actually working correctly. All right, so once again, case sensitive, so WHS2. And if we did this right, as soon as we hit enter, it should immediately log in to the Linux kernel and then start Eclipse, and Eclipse will prompt us for the next password. Yay! And we love that noise, don't we? Okay. All right. And everything appears to be good. Now, I realize that was extremely convoluted and confusing, but I expect in your particular company, there's not going to be a lot of times when you have to set up an Eterm user. But If it has to be done, this is the best way of doing it. Now, God help you, this was the simple overview of how to do user account creation, and I'm just going to here on the back end spend a couple minutes talking about some of the more important stuff you need to know. First off, Eterm. If you need a copy of Eterm to install and it's been lost, nobody seems to know where the hell it is, that seems to happen regularly, where you get the download for Eterm is here at Epic Web. Contact, if you don't have your Epic Web login, and I'm sure if you're listening to me you don't, and everyone's pleading ignorance, Epic Web, what's that? Then you're going to have to talk to get the person who knows your Epicare account. Create a case asking for account creation and authorization to Epic Web, because it's a completely different password and completely different login to get into that. Once you have access to Epic Web, then you've got all the documentation you need, the Eclipse Red Book, as I said, and a few of the other stuff, and then you can actually get the Eclipse. Too much coffee this morning. Come on. Downloads. And there, yeah, okay. And okay, here you'll see where you can get the stuff that you need. Here's Eterm. I think the last version that they did was 4.25 or something like that. Oh, now I see. Well, that's interesting. I'd been told that they'd stopped developing this a while ago, but we see they've created an updated version in 2022. Uses SSH sessions, so some level of bearer encryption. We'll see. Learn something new. Eclipse tends to be very good at making changes and not telling anyone. Anyway, so this is where you would download Eterm so you can install it on your local PCs. As I mentioned, basic Eterm configuration. We'll just cover here real quick. We've done this in other videos. Communications port is going to be network telnet. Put in the IP address of your host, just the IP address, nothing else. Put in the terminal ID. If you do not know the terminal IDs set up in your system, if you're in Eterm, you can go into the system files. Come on. Terminal setup. Boy, it's being clunky. Trying that on the wrong count. Okay. So if you're not familiar with which terminal IDs are in your system, which you probably aren't if you're listening to me, then go into system files, terminal setup, put in no search criteria, and this will tell you your whole listing of terminal IDs in your system that need to be applied to either Solar or Eterm as such. All right, so going back to the Eterm configuration here, network telnet, host IP address, just the IP address, whatever terminal ID is appropriate, and we see your branch 1 office is what I'm doing. Enable debug, enable edit, auto dial. All right. So that's the communications, and the last thing you want to do probably is change the font from the default raster 10x8, which gives you a little postage stamp size Eterm window like this. If you change the font to Eclipse Bold, then the screen is scalable and can be made full screen for old eyes, so you can make this bigger and more readable. All right. So keep that in mind. That's how you get at Eterm. That is the basic configuration for Eterm in as few seconds as I can get away with. If you need to install Solar on any computer on your network, if you go ahead and get to the Eclipse help page, which if you're running Solar, that's probably the simplest way of getting to it. Okay, so find a machine that has Solar, click on the help. All right. And that gets you to the help system. All right. All I really wanted here was, all right, in your system, your IP address plus port 2080 gets you to the main page of where the software is installed. The software installer is for Solar. So if you need to install Solar on a machine, you go to IP address colon 2080. That's port 2080. You'll get this page. Click on Install Now, and this will download the Java installer for Solar, and then you can install that on the PC. I don't believe you need administrative access for that on the PC. Not quite sure. When you go to start Solar after it's first installed, and let me show you this from the beginning here. So, boy, this is fun. I thought this would be a 20-minute video. I bet you did too. I'm sorry. Okay, so when you go to start Solar the first time, before you type the login, click Preferences and put your terminal ID in here first, and whatever little minor tweaks that you might need to do. Do OK. Then type in your login. Well, I might as well do warehouse 2 to make sure that still works. 2093. Oops. All right. Well, let me do the other one. Make sure that one worked. Okay. So I'm getting in a hurry and misspelling things because I want this to be over, which I'm sure you do too. Okay, so let me not do that. Oh. All right. Works better when you type in the right user ID. Anyway, so go to Preferences, put in the terminal ID, then log in, and then you're in good shape here. If done properly, of course, you can see the terminal ID shows up down here in the lower right-hand corner. So that's where you go to get the software. That's how you do the basic configurations for the two major interfaces. One last bit before we wrap this up, because boy, this got long, this was the simple. Yes, there's a lot of background information I put in there, but this was just the simple. Now, I will be brief because we could easily spend 2 hours talking about the detailed, complex way of doing things. So, first, menus. From within Eterm, there is under System Programming, there is a thing called Program Editor. This is what the Eclipse installer uses to program the different menus that were put into your system. This is, God forbid you should ever have to, if people have forgotten, where you might have to go to figure out what menus have been programmed into your system. When in doubt, as I said, I've found that having truncated menus will bite you on the ass, so usually I just use the menu main, which is everything. And I would suggest you do too, because it's just not worth the hell. Anyway, so the program editor in Eterm is where the running that program editor, and don't do this if you're a casual user or casual novice administrator. Do not create your own custom menus if you think you're going to be clever without a great deal of caution and forethought. But anyway. So that's where the menus are created. What menus are in your system will show up here in the drop-down, and this gets really kind of ugly here. But if you blank it out, you should be able to see all of a lot of this is going to be garbage or things that apply to other things, but you should see all the menus that were created in your system by going through this. You can shorten this menu by typing in a little bit of information, so we know 5SW is what the menus were probably. Yeah, okay, so here are some menus that were created. So here would be a menu that would just give the options that the accounts payable person would want: accounts receivable, general ledger, manager, quotes. You get the idea. And main, obviously, is the full menu. I realize I am blazing through this. You don't want to know all the details. All right, authorization keys. There's two different ways of grouping authorization keys. In the original system, what you did was over here will give you the full list of all the authorization keys in the system. There are, I think, 1,500 of them in total. It gets ugly. There is a report you can create in a report writer that will give you a full list of authorization keys. At some point over the years, I created a spreadsheet that breaks down what authorization keys are assigned and at what level is each template. A template is a grouping of authorization keys that's supposed to be for a certain function. So here is a template that was created for accounts payable. Here are all the authorization keys to get into the various programs and what level view and modify or create that type of thing in the system. As you can see, this is an old list. Okay, this is only 520 authorization keys. Keep in mind, though, I think they're up to maybe 650 now. Every year, they add a few more authorization keys and a few more levels. But what's 520 times 3 levels? That's a lot of possible variations, millions of variations. So you can really get crazy with templates. Anyway, in the old system, you created a template, and then you assigned a template rather than all the individual keys to a user. Then later on, they created a system called roles, where it kind of did the same thing as templates, but you could kind of capture the some of the other configuration information here. And most people don't use roles because it's kind of confusing. If you're going to use roles, it's just easier just to copy an existing user or create a template user account with all the configuration information and copy that when you go to create a new user. Sometimes, so in the simplest way, usually you create a template, it's already got the keys and the authorization levels, and then you just assign that. Authorization keys in the system are cumulative, so like we have different level of sales. Sales 1 might be just counter sales. Sales 3 might be a full level of creativity where they can see costs, they can adjust margins to within a certain range, that type of stuff. These are cumulative, so any authorizations that one template gave, if there's an additional higher level, then they combine and give you the most highest level. Sometimes there's an additional straggler authorization key that you need to add for a particular user to give them an additional feature that the template wouldn't. I know that sounds really crazy and confusing. It is. This is why the simpler thing is just to copy an existing user. You can create your own templates. I highly suggest that the more clever you get, the more you do so. But don't get too lost in the weeds. As I said, if you try and lock things down too much, you're going to put yourself in administrator hell by constantly having to tweak. Don't do that. Do just enough, not too much. So that's a brief talk of how menus are created, how they're assigned, what authorization keys are, how authorization keys are grouped into templates and how you assign templates, how you assign additional authorizations and authorization keys and levels that might not be in the template, and terminal IDs, as we said before in the simple one. That's you assign what locations the user is able to access by using the locations here in their account. How do you create terminal locations? That's an hour-long conversation right there. But if you can do this from Eterm or from within Solar, but actually let me do this one through. Okay, so here's the the same information that we saw in Eterm, but in Solar. That's under System Files, Terminal Setup. This gives you your listing of all your terminal IDs. Terminal IDs are basically to assign for reporting if a sale's booked, what branch and what sales source is supposed to be assigned to it, what the default ship via is, and this also organizes, if you log into a terminal with a certain terminal ID, what the printer is that should be printing the forms that you print is. Hopefully the terminal ID is set up with a printer that's close to where the damn PC is, so when it prints, it'll print where it's supposed to. So that's the main thing that the terminal ID is supposed to do, is control when you print something, what printer it's going to print to, and reporting information. Creating new terminal IDs is fairly simple, and you might want to do that at a later point. We've got another video that explains that bit. All right. Tried not to get too much in the weeds here. Afraid we got in the weeds. That's kind of the way these things go. Eclipse is a complicated, convoluted old thing. But hopefully this gave you all the information you need. Keep in mind, I gave you a bunch of background information, but the deadest, simplest thing is you need to create a new user. First, find out, are they an Eterm user or a Solar user? If they're just a Solar user and you're sure they're just a Solar user, then you just go into user maintenance, find a employee that's already got everything that this other employee needs to do, or more than likely he's a replacement for someone that got fired. So you just copy the guy that was fired, change the email address, change the basic user information, assign a password, and you're good to go. Keep in mind when you're assigning passwords, in the Eclipse system, the password is really an identifier for a user. I know that sounds kind of funky. So the upshot is that a password has to be unique to each user. Do not try and assign the same password to two different user accounts, because it fouls up the log. Well, it just won't let you do it. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. So the fundamentals are simple. Anyway, I don't want to make this any longer than I already did. Thank you for your time and attention, and have a wonderful day.